I will introduce to you, it's my pleasure, Elizabeth Meyer, who teaches at the University of Virginia School of Architecture and who is widely recognized as a landscape design theorist and critic. Her recent publications include Sustaining Beauty, Slow Landscape, Musings on a Manifesto, and essays in monographs on landscape architects Nelson Beard Waltz and Taylor Collidy-Leith-Leon from Melbourne. So I'm going to ask Beth to please come up here, and she's going to introduce our panelists for this final session. Thank you, Beth.
In the spirit of expediting conversation, I'd like all the panelists to come up now, and I'll have some brief introductions because I do want to have time for both their comments and questions from you before what I am told is 6:30 time. And also, if you're like me, I think you might have seen this day as an analog for some kind of painful cross-continental flight. So the seatbelt light is off, and if you need to get up and stretch, do it right now so that you can make it through the last 30 minutes. It's a great pleasure to introduce this panel, which includes both landscape architects, planners who are associated with academia and practice. And I'm looking at the order, and I think it's the order that I have here too, but Anita Berrizbeitia, professor of landscape architecture here at the GSD, who was also a primary instigator at an event 10 years ago with very similar interests, the Large Parks Symposium, where large peripheral airports were one of the typologies that was a subject of focus. And then Felipe Correa, professor of urban design here at the GSD and principal of Somatic Collaborative in New York City. Christophe Girot at the end, professor of landscape architecture at the ETH in Zurich. And as you know from some of his comments earlier in the conference, very interested in the role of traces and site, even in large projects like airports. Eelco Hooman, who you just heard from GROSS.MAX, Edinburgh, who is a visiting faculty member here. And then Margaret Jones from Hargreaves Associates, who was one of our early speakers today. And Chris Reed of both STOSS, Landscape Urbanism, and Harvard GSD. We've been asked as a panel, end of the day roundtable discussion, to address a set of questions. Each of the speakers talking for a couple of minutes about some of the lessons learned and some of the issues that have been brought to bear. And I thought I might just introduce the discussion by saying a couple of brief things. One is that we've been introduced to this notion of the airport as an unexplored type, but it's been very interesting that over the course of the conversation that it has revealed threads and issues that are familiar on many other projects, whether it has to do with the scale of large parks or the debates about generic open space, non-places versus site specificity, full spaces, grounded conditions, on the difference between a kind of building-focused understanding of the typology of the airport or a site focus. And we've seen a lot of the same social stratifications in terms of race and class and gender in airports that occurred in 20th century cities, suburbs, schools, train stations, and national parks. But the thing I think that has come into focus is that the extreme conditions of the airport landscape, its scale, its regimes of control, as we saw with that amazing video of living under the airplane right-of-way, the sensory experience, that these extreme conditions cause us to reconsider and reconfigure standard ways of working and operating. So with that introduction about the fact that the airport is on the one hand familiar, on the other hand so extreme, I'd like to start the wrap up with Anita saying a few remarks about findings, observations from today, and then we might just roll down the table. Try to keep remarks to a couple of minutes so that we might have 10, 15 minutes at the end for exchange, conversation about the future of this conversation outside of the room today.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to Charles and Sonja for a fantastic day and show outside as well. I've been very interested by the comparisons and connections between landscapes and airports and the long and productive dialogue between the two throughout this conference. And it has been especially interesting to see how conceptual frameworks of landscape get applied to the analysis of airport sites and their histories, but also the way in which airports themselves, initially the source of eradication of habitat, how that situation gets turned around, as in the analysis of Floyd Bennett Field, where the airport then becomes the agent for possibly bringing back lost habitats because of sea level rise. And so what this tells me is that the relationship and the history and the dialogue between airports and landscapes over the long durée will be very much evolving and ongoing as both airports and landscapes respond to the outside world in different ways. As has been mentioned before, Dennis Cosgrove in his essay Airport Landscape mentions or makes a comparison between, say, Georgian landscapes and airports. What is useful about this is, in fact, to stretch the potential meanings, to use his word, of the conventional associations between landscapes and airports. And so what I'd like to suggest is that, and I'd like to just parenthetically say that I've worked on a couple of competitions for airports in heavily problematic sites in very dense cities with significant social problems. So I am very interested in the social ecology that comes out of airports and the parallels that we can make between those and public space. Because airports are sites of communication. They break barriers of time and space imposed by geography. And they produce communication between people, places, and economies that would not have been possible. This is in spite of the stratification of airport space mentioned earlier. The fact is that they do enable things that would have not been possible. And so they force contact and interaction. And in spite of airports being the epitome of alienation and non-places, they are also, in fact, like great public landscapes, places of great emotional experiences where we can see extreme joy and sadness, anxiety, relief, anger, and indifference. And yet individuals can modulate this contact in whichever way they wish, mediate and manage their own dialectic between private and public lives in a myriad ways. So airports register all the potentialities that travel, displacement, reinvention can yield, and likewise public landscapes can also register the entire gamut of personal and collective aspirations and desires. So they provide the opportunity to get outside of ourselves, to externalize and exchange in order to imagine the world differently. So they are liminal zones in the social sense as well as in the ecological sense, as has been demonstrated today. So a particular challenge and opportunity for the afterlife of airports would be to do what Eelco's video, in fact, just did for us, to retain that dimension of the imagination that is enabled by communication and contact between individual situations and places and ideas that would not be able to take place in everyday life. So as we consider the enormous complexity between each site, I would argue that the challenge and the opportunities to move beyond the logistical dimensions of design, as necessary as these are, to move beyond them as the object and the subject of the work, to move it beyond all of the logistical complexities, to create a plural landscape, one that facilitates discourse, human action, where categories are redefined, experiences renewed, and social space reinvented frequently.
Thanks, Anita. Felipe.
Thank you very much, Sonja and Charles, for inviting me. Both as an architect and as a huge fan of the aviation age, this conference has been quite enlightening. And it's been a delight to be here for the last 2 days. I would like to, in a way, open these comments by sort of bringing up the importance of the airport and the airfield within, I think, a much larger typology, which is that of the derelict large urban landscapes. These large infrastructures that for a long period of time had a particular function, a particular directionality in city, and the larger challenges that we actually have in rethinking those large infrastructures, giving new uses to those large infrastructures, while also retaining a particular sense of the collective memory and the history that those large infrastructures have provided for the city. And in that sense, within sort of the questions that Sonja emailed, one of the points that she asked is, we have a large number of projects for conversions of airports. Many of these have not been built. How important is it for these to get built? And while I think that on a case-by-case basis, it's very important that these get built, what for me is more interesting about this symposium, and primarily about the show outside, is that it actually creates a body of work that in many ways is preemptive. Because I think the large number of decommissioned airfields, or sort of downsized airfields, that are going to come in the future is much greater than what we've actually seen today. So for me, what I think we can learn from this session and from the exhibition is to begin to expand, I think, a set of toolkits that can allow us to be able to engage with these geographies that I think puzzle in a huge manner to many sort of municipalities, because of course they're sites of huge political contestation. Generally, the first and most obvious solution for them is turning them into a park. But of course, what a park entails in the context of an airfield is, I think, a much larger discussion than what I think many cities are willing to explore. And I think for me, the biggest challenge is in being able to deliver a series of projects that can actually claim back that space in an operative manner to the city, right? Once that the airport is no longer an airport, there are many geometries of that infrastructure that are no longer relevant. How do you actually negotiate those scales while also maintaining the larger history that that airfield provided? And in that sense, I think that as we move forward, being able to have a larger sort of, or a more expanded toolkit that the disciplines of design, architecture, landscape, urbanism can provide, I think is going to be extremely important, because of course ideas travel in space and time, and I think a project that does not get built, in Iceland might influence a project that does get built in Ecuador or in Singapore. So I think for me, the biggest sort of lessons of today has to do with how this can help us inform the way that we deal with these sites tomorrow.
Great, thanks. I'm sure you're full by now, but let's keep going. For me, on the one hand, today we saw a number of very studied inquiries into how airports work, their roles with regard to global economies, global and local politics, accountings of society and culture today is read through these enabling infrastructures and their socio-political administrative protocols and impacts. On the other hand, we saw a series of projects that really demonstrate, as you just pointed out, Felipe, airports as the 20th century post-industrial site, a fertile, messy, complicated ground for landscape practice today, primarily when the use of airports as airports has largely passed. And I suppose one takeaway from today is to find ways that these parallel paths of inquiry can begin to intersect and perhaps collude. In this way, too, I go back to this morning's presentation by Adrienne on the Schiphol project, because it's one of the few projects that we've seen today, one of the few, say, landscape architectural projects that really engages the problematics of the working airport. And it's a project that reminds us that some of our best work can be provisional, indeterminate, weak with a capital W. Weak is at its most promising. Weak in that it's non-figural. It deals more with the forces and flows of active airport life. Strategy, for me, it still resonates. It's both relentless and resilient. It constantly reacts and remakes itself in response to irritants, opportunities, and openings over time. Sometimes this may be the best a designer can do, best in a non-impotent way, to script a weak and productive dance between active, ameliorative, even decorative landscapes and the operational construction logistics of an airport authority. Beyond that, I've got to confess I've spent as much time out of the room with ASLA obligations today as I've spent in the room. So I too want to redirect you to the exhibit in the hall, a great collection of projects where airports clearly have become a ground for practice, a ground for experimentation with light and water and air and atmosphere, with current and emerging modes of urban and metropolitan occupation, with ecology and succession. At their best moments, these projects demonstrate that the afterlife of airports can indeed be grounds for critical inquiry and true speculation, in addition to being a very clear register of where the discipline is today. But coming out of an event like this, I'm most interested perhaps in where we might go now. And I want to conclude by just talking about two themes, the operative or operational on the one hand, and the imaginative on the other. And I want to point you to three marginalized installations in the exhibit, if only as an invitation to kind of get you to see these hidden spaces. First, I want to talk about the work by Bobby Petrusco and Charles Waldheim in the library, work that extends the territory of the airport through space and time. It utilizes new four-dimensional modeling and visualization techniques to reveal the hidden structures, territories, and choreographies of airspace. These animations point toward an expanded realm for inquiry, new tools and techniques that may better deal with issues of time and change that have long been central to the landscape discipline. Second, I want to point to Pierre Bélanger's work with his colleagues at OPSIS in the elevator lobby on the first floor, which in many ways blows open the doors for disciplinary inquiry and discourse. It moves far beyond the physical borders of an individual airport site. It identifies new oceanic and atmospheric territories, expansive scopes that extend to satellites and surveillance, as much as it touches on current issues of global population and climate change. It puts bees into play with drones and nuclear submarines, eagles and airplanes into play with geothermal wells and underwater exploration. It starts to rewrite the brief for landscape practices, both relative to airports and not. And lastly, I want to refer to the work of Luis Callejas in the fourth floor Dean's wall, with apologies to the Dean for referring to his suite as marginal within the school. In part, to me, this work reminds us of the socio-political implications and potentials of our work, even when conceived playfully and fancifully. And I think here of Luis's proposal for floating cows and houses that temporarily might occupy the airspace of London's Heathrow Airport. More than that, though, I think this collective work is a project of the imagination, of the aspirational. It doesn't seek to materialize what we know can already be done, but it starts to chart new itineraries. It projects new trajectories for our collective disciplinary flights forward. All three, I think, are great places to start as we think ahead.
Wow. It's very simple. I've been, by the way, on a kind of strange band. I've been around the world this last 10 days, 1.5 time. I've been in 15 airports. But I want to make a kind of maybe strange observation. I like the very simple word airport as a port of the air, like we got seaports as well, and meeting the sea. Yeah, okay. But what I like about what a kind of a strange observation, because on one hand we talk about all those airports, they're becoming non-spaces and they're becoming very generic and lookalikes. But in a funny way, if we talk them as airports, if there's anything in this kind of generic landscapes, what is highly specific is climatological conditions. You know, if I'm in Scotland, I have a completely different skyscape as if I'm in this fantastic, beautiful Dutch landscape with this pregnant clouds as we see in the Dutch landscape paintings. If I'm in Beijing, I don't see anything at all because it's one big fog of air pollution and dust. So I think actually air, the quality of the air, the wide expanse of space reveals exactly where we are. So it is a kind of funny thing that the airports are becoming very generic. But what it reminds us, because of just these climatological conditions, I was landing just from Boston to Amsterdam on Reykjavik. You know, air is highly specific. And I think, so looking on those slides today, with all the same similar airports, I saw a fantastic different sky. So that's something I learned today.
Thank you. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that Southwest Airlines is the largest airline domestically. That just seems wild to me. It's hard to believe. I love flying and I love airports. So I may be the only person in the room. Perhaps that's because as a child I never flew. We drove all over the country and went to national parks, and my first airplane flight was for my first job interview after graduating from college. And it's a good thing because I fly about 200,000 miles a year now, so I still like it. So I say that because I wanted to come around to something Christophe said last night, which really resonated with me, which was about these places as places. And I'm talking now about airports being reused for other things, being made into landscapes, which it also sounds like there will be more and more of those. And the question, and sort of retaining the sense of those places, which I think are in a lot of ways very beautiful. And the question that was asked earlier today, which I don't think was quite addressed, was as we reclaim these landscapes and we make something wholly new of them, should we be retaining anything of what they were culturally or what they were as places? So I thought that was a really great question. And I think about Ken's Orange County Great Park and Tempelhof, the Tempelhof proposal that I think is really beautiful, both of which are really beautiful, but Ken almost chose to deny scale or to change scale, to change the landscape in a way, if I read it correctly, whereas the Tempelhof proposal magnifies the scale in a way, amplifies the awesomeness of that site. And I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but I think it's really important to think about the quality of these places because they are specific, and not just to look at them as land, but to look at them as places. And they are something no other place is, and they have qualities no other place will have, the flatness, the scale, the horizon, the sky. And I think it's really important that we not neglect that.
I thought the discussion this afternoon was very interesting. I mean, obviously, airports are places of power, places of opposition. One could almost argue that the hut in the forest could not have happened without the landing strip coming. And I think this culture of opposition, and if I can say it plainly about the field of landscape architecture, this culture of being more in an offensive position, would be something that I would recommend to all. I'm rather concerned today. I spoke to Philippe Coignet, I saw Ken Smith's project, I know about Eelco's project. I find that we're very fragile, simply placing projects on sentiment and a higher aesthetic level. There's clearly a political positioning there that needs to be reconsidered. And what I find interesting, the architect and urbanist, French architect urbanist Bernard Huet, in his conference in Rotterdam in '93 at the Institute of Architects, said, but that's his position, he's a very conservative gentleman. He said basically the 20th century had not invented any types, compared to the 19th century city, apart from parking lots and airports. He probably forgot nuclear power plants on purpose, but I think he was talking about urbanity. He was talking about the urban condition. And if there's one thing about an airport that defines it, is its perimeter. And everything we've heard about today is about how this liminal space gets defined, qualified, disqualified, etc., etc. And therefore, when I spoke yesterday, I basically said I don't really see a distinction between a running airport and a disused airport, because if we were able to really grasp that particular quality, which is the confine, which is the perimeter, and if landscape architecture could really actively use existing airports, that's why I found Adrian's discussion very interesting. I found Henri's proposal full of hope in a way, because finally it got into the Richtplan, it got into the sort of established plan of the city, and the perimeter was kept in a way sort of integrated. I think that we'd be on a sort of thread there. I think that instead of just dealing with content and putting either ecology or sentiment in this receptacle, I think we should concentrate on the receptacle itself and work along those lines. And in a way, if the edge, if the liminal space of the active airport were consolidated, then when it gets disused, it would be a frame already to work from. So I'm very optimistic. But at the same time, I'm very worried when I see all these disused projects. I mean, I followed Philippe's project since it was chosen. I was on the jury for that, and I see this sort of star shape landing in, sort of suburban, thing coming in 10 years after. There's really a problem. There's really a problem. Is that we can't just come in with ecological models and think that the job's done. We have to be much more offensive, and we have to work on that limit where the battle is happening.
I think Christophe's comments are actually a terrific way of closing the round table. I just heard from Sonja, there's a provost outside and some things that have to happen with alumni. So if the panel's okay, we're going to have a couple hours for questions and conversation with the reception outside. Sonja has some closing remarks, a few remarks, and we'll continue talking in the exhibition space.
So thank you very much, Beth Meyer. Thank you to the panelists up here. So my remarks are essentially a big, big thank you. So I hope you've all had a good day, and that it has yielded inspiration and food for thought. So I would really like to use the last couple of minutes to say a big thank you to Charles for his shared enthusiasm in airport landscape, for inviting me to co-curate this project. Thank you to Sienna Scarf from Urban Agency, and to Dan Borelli and David Stewart Zimmerman, who together with their installation team have turned the GSD into a concourse and a runway, at least for a while. To Melissa Vaughn, Ben Prosky, Sarah Bordy, Anne Matthew, Nicole Zander, Ronnie Saraf, and Megan Sandberg. A big thank you to Dalal Al-Sayer, is she here? And to Azura Cox, and to Atiya Kurakiwala, who might be actually seeing us in India. So hi, thank you for their assistance, and you all did a very fabulous job. So my thanks also go to the staff in the Loeb Library, to Rina Gorstein, Johanna Kazubowski, Ardis Cosbiel, Alex Rieskind, Anne Whiteside, Ines Zalduendo. A big thank you to my colleagues Silvia Benedito, Luis Callejas, Kelly Doran, Fadi Massoud, Bobby Petrusco, and to Alan Zayak. And I would like to thank Ante Liu from Toronto, Linda Ford and Jeffrey Trimble from the Museum of Zoology at Harvard University here. And also thank you to Flavio Leo and his team at Boston Logan Airport. They've all been amazing. Amazing support and help. This conference would not have been possible without Chantal Blakely and Emily Thompson, who many of you have communicated with and who are running all of this behind the scenes. And thank you also to Hal Gold and his team, to all the students who've helped today and done a terrific job. And last but not least, thank you to you, our audience, and to our speakers and moderators to spending the time with us today. And hopefully we'll have some fruitful conversations in the future. Thank you all.